Welcome back to the Racial Draft Podcast. I am your host, Michael Terrell Ford III, joined by my sometimes co-host, Marky Keaton.
Hey, pleasure.
And this podcast is brought to you by Vodka Mixed with Limeade.
Happy to be with you guys tonight. I'm cheating a little bit. I've got my traditional Corona Light up in here with me. But because we're recording a little late tonight and it's a Sunday and I also have work tomorrow, drinking a little coffee, try to stay alive or whatever. So don't hold it against me.
All right. And we're joined this week by one of the illustrious captains in the racial draft, the Latinx delegation, Peña. Tell the people what they need to know about you.
Thank you. Yeah, really happy to be part of the show today. So Mike and I have gone way back. I've known each other for something like 25, 30 years. We went to high school together. Oh, wait a second, I just gave away our ages. Never mind. We've known each other for a while, went to unspecified schooling at the same time. Since way back when, had a love for comic books. As a kid, I wanted to be a comic book artist myself. Would just obsessively draw, especially mostly the Marvel world, especially mutants. When I was coming up, it was that time with Jim Lee and Chris Claremont and all of this, and Rob Liefeld. All of them actually.
A lot of pouches.
So many pouches and no ankles. You couldn't find an ankle in the whole bunch. It was just sort of singularity, these points in time between shins and feet. So yeah, I had a love for comics for a really long time, but there was sort of a middle period there in my life when didn't really read much in terms of comics. Trying to build a family and a career and so on and so forth. But read some stuff from Vertigo and Image and things like that. The grown-up stuff.
Right.
But I got to tell you, Jonathan Hickman has totally pulled me back in. Went back to reading trade paperbacks, and then all the way back to actually buying single issues. Because of the amazing work that Jonathan Hickman and everybody related has been doing to Avengers and X-Men comics. And so I've got.
Now, do you have an unlimited membership? Have you been able to fill in some of your gaps with Marvel Unlimited?
Yeah, so I've actually got a Comixology Unlimited membership.
Okay.
So on Comixology, great platform for buying comics, obviously, but they've also got a huge, back catalog, not just Marvel, but lots of good Image stuff in there, and lots of good Vertigo stuff in there and everything. So, you can pick up on things like Saga, and Fables and things like that, along with, your kind of normal. Or at least, more commonly known, superhero comics. So yeah, Comixology Unlimited, I highly recommend it. If you have an iPad,
yeah,
they're
unfortunately not sponsoring us, but that did seem like a live read.
But yeah, I will take a free subscription at least. I mean, that's worth it, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So guys, can I say this conversation, the opening has triggered sort of a random question for me. Sort of not related, but I'm just wondering, are comics still dying as a platform? I feel like I remember hearing years ago, oh, comic book readership is dying off or whatever, or is it still huge? I guess I'm just trying to figure out where this market is at right now.
So as obviously right now with the coronavirus, it's in a little bit of flux. When it comes to print is still, I believe 80 to 90% of the market, still print rather than digital. But there's been some movement in the last couple of years. Not as much as I would have projected, but there is some migration. And because of that, there's one main supplier called Diamond, and they were hit hard by the quarantine and the shutdown and all the shops being closed. And they're just sort of now spinning towards publishing physical books again in the upcoming weeks. I want to say the 27th sounds about right. But in the meanwhile, there's been a little bit of flux in terms of with the big publishers, because they've started doing digital only sales, which up until there was a lot of fight to not have digital sales cannibalize physicals. And what's probably going to happen in the next couple of years is going to see a lot of shops failing, and as the shops fail, then the transition to digital will sort of take fully hold. Both Marvel and DC have their kind of Netflix style monthly membership where you can go back and read back issues. So they're preparing for kind of a direct to consumer model. But as far as the raw numbers, yeah, I mean, it's not as strong as it was in the 90s, but a lot of that was fueled by speculation. It's much stronger now because both of the big companies are backed by, billion-dollar conglomerates that are mining it for IP. Like comics won't go away because they're a really cheap way to generate new IP that can then turn into billion-dollar movies.
And I think if you look at the history of, every other form of media, essentially, since the digital revolution, you just can see the path I think comics are going to be on, where essentially digital distribution is going to be the primary form of distribution. I think it's silly to try to resist it, so that print doesn't get cannibalized. I mean, newspapers did the same thing, and it was a really terrible idea, that they've had to try to recover from. They were trying to protect advertising in the physical newspaper when the entire world was saying, no, we've got laptops, we got iPads, like we can get all kinds of news, immediately, without having to step out and, grab a newspaper from a box or whatever. I think what might happen is that you get the print versions being sort of the premium experience.
Yeah.
You look at exactly like vinyl, you look at music, there's still heads who love getting vinyl and having like a beautiful pristine experience. People who love getting Blu-rays and have their beautiful, in theater experience, or going to the movies for the reason that it's a, bigger screen, special effects, all that kind of stuff. And I bet you comic books will go the same way. Like I'll still buy maybe a physical collection if it's for something that I really cared about, you know what I mean? Like some book that I want on the shelf and I just want to sit there with the art or what have you. Right. But by and large,
that would be more like a special edition trade paperback.
Exactly.
As opposed to weekly books at your local comic book store.
Exactly. I mean, I have wondered why there's not more cross-pollination. Like, why, when everybody in the world is going to see Avengers or Iron Man, why when I buy that ticket on Fandango am I not getting like a special issue of Iron Man digitally? Just sort of like mix and match all of those things together to get people interested in all the different platforms.
So it's funny, I have conversations like that with people on comic Twitter. And what I like to remind them is that the audience of people who are hardcore comics readers is so much smaller than the audience of people who are, who are moviegoers. And is an expensive habit. I'm a big believer that if you really want someone to get into comics, the way to do it is through Marvel Unlimited or DC Unlimited, DC Universe, whatever it's called, because at that point, everything's new to them, so for a flat monthly fee, they can go back and kind of get hooked on whatever they want to get hooked on. And once they've built up months or years of being a fan, of learning about all the characters, then they're primed to start spending, $50 to $100 a week on comic books, which is
okay. But they don't have to spend $50 to $100 a week, Mike. You just need them to buy 2 or 3 issues or whatever. And certainly, if they're willing to pay to go see the Avengers and then Black Widow, and they're willing to see 2 or 3 movies a month, I would think they'd certainly be willing to buy 2 or 3 comics a week. They don't have to get to $100.
But single issues are incredibly unsatisfying. So, during this middle period where I just didn't read comics in single issue at all ever, it was because basically I was like, look, I've got a career I'm working on, I'm having kids, I'm building a family, all this kind of stuff. And I'm not gonna track, month to month the drip of narrative that actually gets released with every issue. It's a very weird way, like serialized anthologies are a very old-fashioned way of telling stories, and the only place it really exists any longer is comics. That's why I switched to just waiting for something to appear in a trade paperback. Yeah. But the people who do the single issue, those are the ones who end up spending that much money. But I don't think the general public would be satisfied by it.
Yeah, and a lot of that is because it's, you know, when you're a hardcore fan, you want to know the story as soon as the story comes out. So you're on the hook for following the story from week to week and all the different tentacles of the way the story goes, which is it was just mostly going to go beyond just one book. Occasionally you'll have a self-contained story, and in that case it's really smart to wait for the trade and read, you know, all 12 or all 6 issues all at once in a binge. But if in the way that the business structure of, you know, at least the modern market right now is, in order to keep the lifeblood of the stores open, there have to be people showing up every week and being willing to spend a certain amount of money every week on a regular basis. And I think, and like I said, I think that the major companies know that that's not sustainable for a large segment of the fan base. But I do think that they could transition more. I mean, for instance, like I said, I have Marvel Unlimited. When Marvel does come out with a new movie, on the front page of Marvel Unlimited is the character who's being showcased in the movie. So that's the.
So they are doing a little bit of that.
Yeah, they're doing it, but I don't think they're doing enough to pitch Marvel Unlimited as the way to as the on ramp to.
Yeah, like I think you should get a trial subscription to Marvel Unlimited with if you go see a Marvel movie, and then you can open up that catalog, that library, and just read as much of the stuff related to that movie as you want to.
Right.
Like you watched Infinity War or whatever, go back and read the Infinity Gauntlet, you know?
But again, I think part of the issue is that Marvel, and, you know, to a lesser extent, DC as well, they don't want to cut the local comic book store's throat yet. You know, at some point they will have to cut their throat, but for now they want to look like they're playing nice with them, and they're trying to be agnostic, digital versus physical. And we may see that change in the coming years. And then I think once that happens, you will see those kinds of package deals. I mean, it's already, we're at it. I can use the same login that I use for Disney across all my platforms, including Marvel Unlimited. So they're ready to flip the switch and be able to leverage one into another.
Very interesting how similar this is to the GameStop video game issue. Between the you know, like it's amazing sort of the crossover here or whatever, and this was something that I hadn't thought about, like the comic, because I can't remember the last time I walked into a comic book store, probably when I was in high school. So I hadn't actually even thought that there were many comic book stores still holding on, and there probably are in like smaller local communities, I would imagine. A lot of stores still hanging on. So that is very interesting.
And the thing is, look, I mean, you know, I think we all have similar politics. So, you know, we're talking about mom and pop small businesses, and the dominant digital player is owned by Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, we're all anarcho-capitalists, right? That's...
You know, I mean, you know,
we're all heavy Atlas Shrugged readers and just waiting for the graphic novel.
Hey man, I just watched that Atlas Shrugged movie trilogy on Amazon, and it was amazing.
God, so you hate yourself?
There you go.
Did you have a headache after?
It was incredible, dude.
I mean, I
best 9 hours of my life.
I read the book a couple years back. I don't know why I did that to myself.
Yo, I probably watched Battlefield Earth under the same spirit, you know, like, this is going to be garbage. I can't wait to grab my popcorn and watch it.
But you know, but to the extent that we're talking about, you know, small mom and pop businesses being, you know, put under the heel of the Amazon machine, I'm sure from a PR perspective, you know, these other big corporations don't want to look like the bad guy if they can help it.
So I could pivot the conversation back a little bit. Interestingly enough, we're still in the intro portion of the podcast.
That we are.
So besides my history with comics, I wanted to give a little bit of my bona fides for being the captain of the Latinx team. So personally, my mom is Puerto Rican and my dad is Cuban. Both of them born in their respective countries, and they both came to the United States, to New York City, actually in the 70s. And then I was born in New York City. My dad, his grandparents, left Spain to Cuba during the Spanish Civil War. Now, tiny history lesson here, and by the way, I'm throwing in some of these history lessons because, you know, as the picks go on, and I'll tell you why. As the picks go on, I'm going to try to, you know, step up to the challenge that a lot of the other people in the draft have been putting out there, which is just going deep on the history and the culture behind their characters. So my family left Spain during the Spanish Civil War. Now, the Spanish Civil War was a battle between fascism and communism, you know, for the heart of Europe, essentially. But it played out as a civil war in Spain. So, thankfully, my family was neither. Tried to fight, you know, you know, fight autocracy basically in one form or another, and ended up being having to leave the country to Cuba, which seemed like a great move at the time. So a generation later, you know, my dad's born and my uncles are born in Cuba. You know, my dad's in the Naval Academy. And what happens? You know, the socialist revolution happens in Cuba. My family becomes, again, political resistors. All of them actually get thrown into labor camps in Cuba as resistors to the communist government, all except for my grandmother. You know, my grandmother was tough and smart. They could not catch her. She ended up building essentially a black market business in Cuba to keep the family kind of going, and orchestrated the breakout, you know, of my family out of labor camps, you know, and out of the country, some directly through the United States and some through Mexico. Now, so, you know, that's sort of the Cuban side of the history. And I go deep on the Cuban side a little bit. You know, obviously I could talk about, you know, Puerto Rico and the diaspora there and the very different racial makeup and all that kind of stuff. But you know, but I tell you that about the past because, you know, on top of that, the term Latinx is something that, you know, is a kind of newly used term. A lot of people have heard Latino and Latina. But Latinx is a term that, you know, tries to respect the idea that Spanish obviously is a very gendered language, like every noun implies, you know, masculine or feminine tenses. But when you're referring to a group of people, you know, a lot of the world is kind of coming around to saying like, hey, it might not be okay to just assume the default is male, you know, when that all of society is kind of structured around, you know, a patriarchy or a matriarchy or what have you. And it just so happens that as a, you know, as a member of the LGBTQ community, you know, it's a term that I like. I know that it's one that causes some other people heartburn though, because you can't really pronounce it well in Spanish, or it feels a little clunky to people's ears. You know, but personally, you know, I want to thank you, Mike, for going with the term Latinx as the default, you know, for this team, because I think it's a good recognition of, at least in my mind, you know, how words matter, and being able to reference, you know, the heart of the thing you're talking about without assuming, you know, gendered structures, you know, is a really positive way, you know, to look at the world. So, my last thing, you know, my mother was a Spanish teacher. So my mother, you know, who came here like dirt poor, you know, from Puerto Rico, ended up actually going to Harvard University for graduate school, Spanish literature. She was a Spanish teacher at our local public high school. And so I grew up with just a love of Spanish literature. You know, she taught me all this stuff that she was teaching in high school, you know, and would bring me into it and whatever. So, so hopefully I can inject some of that in here, you know, some of those stories, you know, some of that art, some of that creativity, you know, that goes beyond the, you know, the Hispanic culture that you normally see represented in the U.S., you know, or the kind of stories that you tend to hear about.
All right, that's good. And I mean, that's as good as a transition into the actual bona fides of the draft. You know, we just finished round 2 of the racial draft, and you happened to kick off round 2 with the first pick, which was Wolverine. Do you have anything more that you want to talk about with Wolverine?
Sure. So I'll tell you, I I had like a sidebar, DM chat, with Mike one day, because coming into this, I thought this was like, the Dave Chappelle show, racial draft, where it's comedy basically, right? Where it's like, you can have a lot of fun with this, right? It's a lot of ways to just make light of the world, right? So I was looking at my picks at first, kind of just purely through that lens. And I was assuming that the characters were the same characters, but they just became from that racial group.
I mean,
or that ethnic group.
I mean, that's essentially what is supposed to happen.
But what was at first confusing, but then beautiful, was reading all the stories from, my God, like our, Polynesian team, our Native American team. I mean, they're bringing back all this stuff I didn't know about, making references to myths or to, historical figures or what have you that I'd never thought of. And while they're not funny at all, and I think we need to cut the sincerity just a little bit. At the same time, I felt like, wow, I've got to, I've got to step it up after this and think, go to the next couple of levels in, but I think there's so much, there's so much you can blend, truth and humor. But anyway, I'm saying all of that as sort of a preamble excuse for why Wolverine is just a friggin' gut stereotype pick for me. So Wolverine, what do people know most about Wolverine? He's got blades in his hands and he's pissed the fuck off, right? Like that's,
I mean, yeah,
that is half my family. Like, not to be stereotypical.
be stereotypical. This is the stereotype free, stereotype safe space.
But as much as I can be like, oh yeah, prep school and Ivy League, yeah, I had machetes in my hand when I was like 8 years old. Absolutely. And yes, I have punched through walls. Several walls, have thrown things. Sure. In fact, I was just having dinner. I've got twin daughters. One of them turns to me, and was talking about like her anger. We were waiting for dinner. Dinner was taking too long. We were all commenting, how we were getting hangry, but didn't want to let it show, whatever. She was like, I let it show. And I'm like, yes, you do, honey. Yes, you do. And she was like, yeah, but mama told me that she was like me when she was little and you were too, right? And I'm like, oh, in which way? I'm like, the anger? I'm like, oh yeah, I've told you all these stories. But in all seriousness, the passion, and the passion that Wolverine has, in his loyalty to the people he cares about, how he takes care of them, in his mission, and really putting himself 100%, in whatever the mission is. And then this, of course, feeling of displacement, I think I mentioned this in my write-up that went into the Twitter post and whatnot. But I always really sympathized with Wolverine, for a number of different reasons. But one of them was this feeling of like, kind of in, but never actually in any group or space or country, that he's in. So Wolverine's lost part of his past. He knows as he starts to recollect some of it, that maybe he comes from Canada. He spent some time in Japan. Professor X tries to give him a home, in the Xavier School, but while he is given that home there, he never really feels like it's natively his home, and all of that is is frankly a story and a feeling that a lot of Puerto Ricans can really sympathize with, because Puerto Rico is this weird, don't call it a colony, this odd Commonwealth thing where, we're part of the United States, but, we can't vote for president. We pay taxes, but, we have a non-voting representative in Congress, which doesn't mean shit, obviously. And so the livest political issue, sort of over a long-term horizon in Puerto Rico has always been, do we want to stay in this halfway position? Do we want to go fully independent? Or do we want to fight to be the 51st state? And there's not agreement. There's never been agreement. Like a lot of the political lines within Puerto Rico kind of break down that way. because that tension of, do I want to do for myself and be for myself, stand on my own 2 feet, no matter if it's going to be a harder struggle, or do I want to align myself, with this superpower, and be fully part of it and be fully part of that community, but maybe I never will actually be fully part of it, like maybe I never will be, seen as an equal, even if on paper, my state, is a state just like any other. That tension has been there forever. And I think I see that tension, in microcosm, in every story of Wolverine.
Okay. Do you think, oh, sorry, jump in, Marky.
No, I just wanted to follow up a little bit on sort of when you bend a character like Wolverine, who is a white character, but sort of historically angry, as even the most casual of fans know. Do you have any concerns sort of about the sort of stereotype threat aspects of this? And does the historical context sort of help you protect against that, essentially? Because one of the things that I think about is that it's very easy to have a white character be angry, and there's not a lot of sort of historical baggage associated with that. Oh, he's a white guy and he's angry, but there's no stereotype threat there. But once you make that character a person of color or whatever, then it sort of gets to be, oh, here's an angry, hot-blooded person of color. When you're crafting stories around this sort of background, like, do you take that into context, or is the fact that there's a historical background there that's relevant, does that fix that sort of intrinsically when you're thinking about how to tell stories around this character?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it comes down to the truth. Like, can you feel that there is like an authenticity to telling that story? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think it's just a reality, that my mom's side of the family is really passionate, and everybody that we knew around were really passionate. And there's 100 different things that play into it, but it's also, something that is a part of the culture, to say that human warmth, that being authentic in the human condition, feeling your feelings, and expressing them to each other is just part of the culture, right? And actually, people who then come to the US and, look at white people, in the US will go, boy, they're so detached, they're aloof, they're reserved, and blah, blah, blah. The stereotype actually goes in the other direction. I think the difference is, though, do you do it with authenticity? So do you, is it sort of seen from afar as an other, and then you are, kind of making this caricature of this other? Or is there, a real thread there that says, no, that is truth, right? That there is that difference in how feelings are expressed and the comfort level people have with expressing their feelings because there are different cultural mores, but weave that into something that feels real. This Wolverine was my second pick. My first pick was Superman. Superman, nobody thinks of him as like being terribly emotional and so on and so forth. And to me, Superman like reminded me of, kind of the higher class Spaniard post-colonial, era who, feels like they, could have been, part of a dominant empire, in a different era, but, in the time in which they are, their empire, literally blows up, and now they're trying to live as, that person who has sort of a chip on their shoulder because, they believe they're special, but special in like a better way, not in the opposite, not in the I'm an outcast, I'm a loner kind of way. You know what I mean? Like, you see the balance, the dichotomy between the Superman versus the Wolverine image, even though they're both, theoretically, immigrant or displaced, countrymen kind of stories. But it comes from a totally different place.
Yeah, and I would, this sort of ties in to what gave me some of the inspiration for the racial draft in the first place, which is that you have these characters that have such a rich history and have been presented in such a layered way, and have all their dimensions be represented, which is something that we generally don't see with characters that are people of color. They're only kind of given to us under one lens. And when you do a race bend and you adopt all those layers in the race bend, and you force someone who has to reimagine that character to also embrace those layers and that humanity, that perhaps if a new character were created that was just like Wolverine, people would project their stereotypes on the character, and it would sort of hold back the ability to be the ability to give that realness and that authenticity that we would want from a character.
I'll tell you, I mean, I appreciate you raising the issue, though, because, you know, it is something that I consciously, you know, am trying to think and worry about, you know, that I think it's super easy to just make the shock, I'm going to, you know, reference some wild stereotype kind of thing. And a lot of folks in media do that. You know, half the Def Jam comics back in the day, you know, it was literally nothing but like, can you believe it? Blackness, you know, and that's like,
Yeah.
It's like, come on, you know, spend a little time on your writing.
You
know?
can do better. Yeah.
Come up with something interesting. And which is one of the reasons why, you know, somebody like a Carlos Mencia does not have a ton of Hispanic fans, you know, because a lot of people look at a Carlos Mencia and they're just like, oh, dude, you know, you're just hammering the same thing, you know, so you can see it even in people that come from that culture, you know, when they're just leaning into that stereotype without an authenticity, you know, without a point of view. So I think it's something we all have to be really careful of, you know, because it's super easy for something like this project to, you know, just turn into like, y'all hate yourselves.
Full dark path.
I guess that's a good transition to some of the comments we got on the Wolverine pick. Actually, we only got one comment on Twitter, and that's from Arturo, our buddy Art, who was on the show a couple weeks ago. He said, somebody get Wolverine a zoot suit. But yeah, we didn't get a lot of comments. I think people were just awestruck with how cool of a pick Wolverine was, and your explanation. It really touched on all of the good points. But there was a lot of controversy about our next pick, and that's.
Can I just say one last thing on Wolverine here?
Sure.
I think I'm also, unlike some other folks, very explicitly thinking about the points. So, you know, Mike and I...
Looking at you, Black Team.
Right? Exactly.
Shade.
I'm sorry, you don't even count. Do you know how the rules work? So, you know, another bit of backstory, you know, Mike and I, we went to high school together, and then he's been the commissioner of a fantasy football league that has included, you know, a few of us from high school since. And so, you know, we've been playing fantasy football forever, and it's mostly, you know, a venue for talking trash with each other and whatnot. I lose $100 every year. But because of that, you know, coming into this and knowing there was like this whole fantasy thing, I was like, all right, what's the scoring system? I'm going to look up data. I've got charts, you know, of like appearances, you know, coming, you know, who's appearing in what, you know, coming up in the next month and all this kind of stuff. Who's more likely to blah, blah, blah. So I'm looking at those lists and going, okay, who's top of the list that I haven't picked yet, or that hasn't been picked by somebody else? And is there a way to tie this together, right?
Right.
So Wolverine, he's a mutant that appears in like almost every mutant comic. And there's 40,000 mutant comics again,
and he
right?
appears outside of the mutant universe.
Yeah, so Wolverine, oh my God. I don't know if people were like paying attention or anything, but like, you know, to put a Wolverine against a Dazzler?
Dazzler was the second pick.
Gauntlet is thrown down.
The second pick in the second round by our friends at the Black Delegation. And to be fair, I'm gonna help them out a little bit. This might be a somewhat long soliloquy.
Help your people, man.
It's going to be about Dazzler's history as originally pitched as a Black woman. So apparently in the 1970s, I'm paraphrasing now. So apparently in the 1970s, when Kiss was really big, Marvel wanted to introduce Kiss in the Marvel universe, and at one point they were going to co-produce alongside Kiss a Kiss-based comic. But when Kiss backed out at the last minute, there was a character that they were working on that was modeled after Grace Jones. She was going to have some of the same iconography as Kiss. And towards the end of that development cycle, though, what tends to happen the whitewash kicked in, and they said, wouldn't it be better if we modeled her after, say, Bo Derek, who was popping then? This was after the 10 movie dropped. So they turned her into a white disco superstar, and they gave her a bit of a push. They put her on a lot of X teams. They gave her a lot of exposure. They were actually going to put out an album at one point, a comic/album.
Does she have roller skates, Mike?
She does have roller skates.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'll share that image when I get it.
My God.
Yeah, she's got disco ball bracelets, you know. So I think that what they were trying to do was correct a historical wrong by bringing Dazzler into the fold. They even had a casting in mind. They wanted to cast Janelle Monáe as their Black Dazzler.
I'm sorry, but everything about this pick is trash. The pick is trash. The backstory is trash. The only cool things you said were Grace Jones and Janelle Monáe. The rest of it, I just zoned out because I couldn't even deal with like Bo Derek's a member of Kiss or some bullshit.
Valid. I tried, guys. That's right.
Well, I'm gonna hot take. I mean, I sort of dig what's happening over there. I think this is super cool and interesting. It's definitely like a lot of history that not only did I not know, there's no universe where I would have known it. So in terms of expanding my brain power to talk about comics history, it's a super impressive pick. Can you score points with it? Can you win the game? That remains to be seen, but it's certainly exciting.
I am very glad I know about all the industry trivia behind Dazzler now.
I mean, to be fair, I'm a fan of Dazzler. I don't think Dazzler gets a lot of exposure. I don't think there's a lot to her. There was actually a fight that happened where, because her power is to turn sound into energy, she fought Black Bolt, whose power is a super powerful voice. And she destroyed Black Bolt because he spoke to her, and she was able to turn that sound energy back into energy. However,
with the power of reverb, I vanquish you.
Okay, fair enough. I mean,
Mike, at the end of the day, I feel like what people are going to ask themselves, like, even if you don't win on points, and who knows how that's going to go down as sort of time goes on, did you win anyway if you provided this sort of educational context, this powerful context about comic books history, essentially, or whatever? So maybe they're playing a deeper game than the rest of us are playing now.
And listen, maybe we'll finally get that Dazzler album, produced by the hottest producers in the game. And it'll be
if that's a Janelle Monáe album, it would be worth it.
Now, this next pick deserves all of the preamble because it's the white delegation. And last week, we mocked the white delegation for their safe pick. They picked Barry Allen, he of fastest man alive status, as their first round pick.
Classic white delegation move.
Right. And we thought, oh, okay, they're just going to preserve and keep superheroes that were white on the white team and
preserve their heritage.
Right. And we had Sean on, and Sean said he had themes. He said he had themes around his picks and, why he felt that they were a good fit for being and staying Caucasian. And we figured, oh, he's Canadian. He's cool. He's nice. He's not playing for keeps. But he drafted Blade right out and coming on the heels of the Dazzler pick. I mean, you can't take a bigger L, really, as the black delegation. I mean, Blade is... So I'm going to read.
It's amazing. One after the other. The black delegation picks Dazzler and everybody's like, what? But why? And how does that connect? And then the white delegation's like, Blade.
And Sean came with a backstory for Blade.
great backstory. And the art, oh, I love the creativity of our community here, but sorry, go on.
So this is his redetermined backstory. In the early 20th century, the British Lord Brooks gave birth to his first heir. During the birthing process, there were complications, and Lord Brooks turned to his most shadiest of advisors, Deacon Frost, to save his wife. Frost was in secret a vampire, and while his vampirism couldn't save the mother, Eric Brooks was born with one foot in either world. Eric was born into a life of privilege. Not only was he a British heir of power, he was the first of his vampiric kin to walk freely amongst the sun and the rich. As he traveled the world, he began to see the horrors, not only caused by vampires, but also of the British. Eric Brooks took up training, deciding that it was on him to make up for the sins of his forefathers. He swore to fight vampirism and colonialism on the same day he took a new name, one to strike fear into the hearts of enemies, Blade. White savior power!
What's super infuriating is I feel like I've heard that story 1,000 times, right? like that's in so many young adult vampire novels and everything. Like it's solid, but then the fact that it comes on the back of taking Blade away from the Black delegation to turn him into the vampire Lestat, basically. It's great.
He's not just white, he's white.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like you've given Blade the original Dazzler background. It's impressive. It's a very nice sort of contrast there. Oh, these characters are actually playing off of each other in the draft here.
That is okay. They're what is it? They are in dialogue with one another. So, as you can imagine, there was a lot of consternation, mostly in GIF form, for that pick. Many of those GIFs came from me. A lot of angry black faces. There was a GIF of Wesley Snipes saying, "Motherfucker, are you out your damn mind?" There was what white nonsense was that? There's sad Will Smith. Damn. There was a spirited defense of by the Black delegation that revenge will be had, and there was talk in the group about the possibility of trades coming into play. So maybe we'll see some trades proposed, future draft picks bundled to try to get Blade back. But let's see. There's what's his name from First Take. He's unhappy. There are many angry gifts, many angry gifts, and many people wanting to have a word with the leaders of the Black delegation for letting Blade slip through their fingers.
Mike, all of this certainly, I think, begs the question in terms of the white delegation. Is there any pick they can make where they can win with the hearts and minds of people watching this draft? They picked the white character, kept it insular in round one, were subjected to a lot of hatred for that. Now they've picked the historically Black character, race bent him in the spirit of the draft, and they're taking a lot of hate for that. I'm starting to wonder, can they pick anybody? Are they in a lose-lose situation because of external factors?
Well, here's the weird thing. It's mostly been, they've been praised for their audaciousness in taking Blade. And the Black delegation has taken most of the brunt of the animosity in letting Blade be picked. More so than, I mean, like you said, it's in the spirit of the racial draft to know that all characters are out there to be taken. So obviously the white.
Although of course, if somebody takes Miles Morales and makes him white, we're having words.
Miles Murphy.
Don't give them any ideas.
But you know, I mean, and you know, if we're being honest, I mean, most of the characters that were drafted in the early rounds were white. So they took some losses along the way, but they had more characters to lose. I do think that the Black delegation is in a tough spot because they want to go on the offensive. They want to pull in some cool characters, and they don't want to burn all their picks on protecting the traditional Black characters, especially in the early rounds. You know, I thought it was from a pure scoring perspective, if we're going back to the scoring system, Blade is a bit of a reach because he doesn't score as much as your A-list characters. He was very much a shot across the bow to the Black delegation. They need to watch their back because anybody can get it. However, let's move on to, I would say, a bit of a reach as well by the Jewish delegation. They drafted Danny Rand, the Iron Fist, who is often the subject of much consternation for his white saviorness.
You know what plays really well these days? Take an Asian character and make them not Asian.
But Iron
That's
Fist
been going great for everybody who does that.
Traditionally Asian, though.
Can't go wrong.
That's the weird thing about Iron Fist. He's not traditionally Asian. He falls under that Dazzler model, though, of being a character that was created in the 70s based around a concept that could have in that time been, I think he was inspired by Bruce Lee, but they thought, again, in keeping with the era, wouldn't it be cooler if he were a white guy? And it really wasn't until they paired him with Luke Cage and created that kind of buddy cop, black guy, white guy dynamic of the rich guy and the guy from the streets that he really took off as a popular character. Both
totally. I mean, I'm just making reference to how over the last decade or so, there have been so many instances in movies, half of them made by Scarlett Johansson, where
Poor ScarJo.
Or what?
Poor ScarJo.
Oh yeah. And so it's a particularly fraught time, to just be like, yeah, sure, but you could do that. Great.
But I am interested. I mean, unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of backstory from the Jewish delegation. Maybe they'll come back around and flesh it out a little bit. What changes, what new layers can be introduced to Danny Rand if he's also, in addition to dealing with the fact that he is culturally appropriating, is also feeling Jewish guilt.
Honestly, Mike, isn't this what's a little bit sad about losing the show at this point? Because weren't they moving off Danny Rand as Iron Fist into an actual Asian Iron Fist as the show moved forward? I feel like that was very thematically interesting and sort of sad that we won't get to see that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the weird thing about the Iron Fist. I mean, it's a tradition that is supposed to stretch back centuries and if not millennia. And, my understanding is based on the comic. There was one previous European Iron Fist, and in the comics, he tracks the guy down because apparently he wasn't killed, and there's an affinity in him finding kind of another person that dealt with what he dealt with, but he's one of the issues with Danny is that Danny's not very good at being the Iron Fist. He deals with his own crap, and he'll, as many comic heroes do, they go through their ups and downs, they show their foibles, and then they step up when the time comes. But he's generally viewed as a screw up, and I think it would have been interesting if there was a third season of Iron Fist to sort of continue to take Danny on that journey of, he lost the Iron Fist, and while it was retrieved by Colleen Wing, traditionally that's not been part of the mythos. So I would imagine by the end of whatever arc they were trying to create, he would either regain something akin to the Iron Fist for himself and maybe they share it, or something happens to her and he has to retrieve it for in order to prove himself.
Well, I just wonder if part of the flaw with the show was that people viewed it as a sort of weak sauce. Is the problem that Danny Rand is a white person who's in charge of something that's historically Asian, or is it just that he's incompetent? And I feel like the show didn't take that head on aggressively enough because it's in this sort of weak sauce Marvel universe, and that would have been more entertaining to watch.
I would say the problem with Danny Rand is that over the long term, he just can't stand on his own as a solo character. and he's better when he's bouncing off of other characters. He's better either in a team or in the tandem with Luke Cage. And, you know, I think that it was always misguided to do a full season of Iron Fist that wasn't really a stealth Iron Fist, Luke Cage team up. You know, I think that without that other half, without the person that balances the privilege with the lack thereof, the sandwich just isn't a tasty one.
Well, I just feel like it's sort of, if Colleen doesn't become a love interest, and there's a sort of a real sort of addressing of that issue instead of just making her sort of like an eye candy character for him, then maybe the show would have been sustainable. The way they did it was a bit insulting, because it's like Danny Rand gets the best of everything. He gets the Iron Fist and the beautiful Asian girlfriend. It's very frustrating to watch.
And it's weird because there's not so over the arc of the Luke Cage, Danny Rand, Misty Knight, Colleen Wing quadrant, they're, you know, they've each, it's a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, there's a lot of cross pollination among those characters, because they're each, you know, good friends and have maybe dated briefly, but ultimately they just best work as all best friends. So, you know, one thing that I thought that the second season of Iron Fist did well was build that friendship between Misty Knight and Colleen Wing. To me, part of what should happen with those characters is that instead of doing the love interest thing, I agree, the love interest thing was misguided. Instead of doing the love interest thing, they should have been building towards Misty and Colleen forming their tight best friend bond alongside Danny and Luke having their best friend bond, because they're really coming at, you know, it's almost like a quadrant. It's almost like a quadrilateral, in that they come together as this team, and they stand together, and they're more powerful, they're more powerful as a unit than they are at any of them as individuals.
So bringing it back to the Jewish team's pick,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I want to bring up some of the discussion from Annie, you know, who's the Team Israelite co-captain, and one of my new best friends, you know, through this project, by the way. Annie is cool as hell. But she was talking about, hey, I think he's easily tweaked to be Jewish, and hello, the story of Moses. Take him to a strange land, raised in their strange customs, lost to his own family, presumably taught to be a warrior. But his backstory is easily tweaked to be Jewish, and there is certainly no shortage of wealthy WASP family origins in New York City. They can have their backstories tweaked to be Jewish as well. And Jewish Danny will definitely be laughing at the fact that his life story has some weird biblical parables.
That's fair. I don't think we got a lot of feedback on that pick from, oh, well, I'm sorry. The Asian delegation was happy that they didn't have to draft him.
Oh, seriously?
Yes.
Oh, man.
Which is a good transition to the Asian delegation's next pick. Their next pick was Tony Stark.
Man, this made me furious. I wanted Tony Stark. I wanted Iron Man so bad. That's a great pick.
It was a great pick. I was surprised he fell to the second round, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he was a surefire first round pick. You know, the Asian delegation gave us a fully fleshed out backstory that I'll attempt to do justice to. Shout out to Ron Solo on Twitter. Tony Sasraputuno is an Indonesian American engineer who worked for the top government defense contractor in the U.S. He worked his way up to become the lead engineer in the whole company, only to find that his inventions were being twisted into weapons of war for the U.S. government. Guilt-ridden, he left the company to create his own company that helps countries develop renewable energy sources, and as Iron Man works to protect people from the very weapons he helped create. So this tracks fairly well with, what Iron Man has done in traditional incarnations. I would be curious to find out if he kind of has the same personality of Tony Stark. If he's that kind of flamboyant, charismatic guy. Maybe some of the same foibles and flaws. Is he still a ladies' man? These are all, I mean, particularly when we talk about, Asian stereotypes. I think the idea of an Asian man who is known as, as a party, as a, big charismatic ladies' man element would be a bit of a subversion of how people, would see an Asian superhero.
It's funny because maybe here, maybe in the U.S., but absolutely not in other countries. I think that's a really good point. I mean, there are obviously so many Asian millionaires and billionaires. There are so many companies, like massive multinational companies that are basically a family-owned and operated business.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got all of these heirs, to the business and everything who are, on the side, just grown up in wealth and all of that sort of thing. I mean, I think it fits so well with the Tony Stark story,
Okay.
And if we don't hear those kinds of stories here, then I think this is a beautiful venue to be able to pull that stuff forward.
Cool.
Again, yeah, I'm super jealous about this one. I have a soft spot for Tony as well because, his superpower is engineering. I mean, and I love that. Like, I'm an engineer myself, and I talk to my own kids, about getting into STEM and all that kind of stuff, and I'm like, look, the biggest hero in the MCU, it's not somebody who got bitten by a radioactive spider, is not a god, it's not an alien, it's somebody who just works their butt off at engineering and makes every weapon they could ever need, but tries to do it for good. I think it's a fantastic story.
As a casual, guys, is this character, Tony Stark, Iron Man, as huge in the comics as he is in the movieverse?
No. I mean, he has only become bigger in the comics by virtue of his character becoming bigger in the movies.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm saying they've even tried to illustrate him, a lot more like Robert Downey Jr. and make him that kind of sort of fast talking, quip machine like Robert Downey Jr. is.
It's funny. I mean, the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe was a bunch of remainders of licenses of intellectual property that Marvel hadn't sold to somebody else yet.
Right.
So they had already sold away, like the Spider-Man and the X-Men and so on. And, I remember reading Iron Man comics as a kid, but very few people knew, like, really who or what Iron Man was, and wondered whether this would be successful at all. They thought it was going to be kind of corny. And it's funny to remember that, like, a lot of those characters in the Avengers were B and C tier kind of characters before the MCU blew up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of funny to think about the fact that it's just a testament to how good their storytelling is, and how they were where they really innovated was bringing forth these characters as close to what they could be in the comics, and distilling them into a cinematic form better than a lot of other companies were doing. A lot of other companies were making movies that were based on comic book characters, whereas I think Marvel was trying to turn comic books into movies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think that I still think that was the best casting, the best
ever.
Yeah. In the symbiosis of what, the meta aspects of what Robert Downey Jr. was in terms of how we saw him, and how a lot of people who were familiar with Tony Stark in the comics could see him being in a movie form. It just came together in its perfect form. And, it turned the Marvel Cinematic Universe into an empire, and turned Tony Stark into an A-list character. He went way, he was probably at the D list, if we're being honest. and now everybody knows who Tony Stark is. Everybody knows who Iron Man is. I mean, little kids are wearing his costume.
I mean, not since Ghostface Killer, adopted Tony Stark, right. One of his aliases.
That is a good point. Even it was a deep cut for Ghostface. It was a deep cut for Ghostface to call himself Tony Stark, Iron Man.
So, Mike, did the Asian delegation talk a little bit about who they cast for this role?
No, they didn't have a casting. I didn't push them for it, but maybe some of the readers will chime in, and I'll if I can get some information from Ron, that would be a great thing. Casting is never a requirement, but if it helps to sort of flesh out how we can visualize the character, I mean, it's definitely useful for Eli. I mean, for Eli in terms of him drawing the characters as a reference point. But no, they didn't have a casting in mind. But I am curious as to whether there's an actor that would be a good fit. Now, the next pick was determined by our poll. As you know, Tamati was on the show last week, and he nominated three possible picks: Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, and Aurora Monroe Storm. And the people spoke, and they spoke loudly, and they chose Storm. So Storm is now Polynesian.
Because the people are never wrong, Mike. Was there any doubt who was going to win this poll?
I mean, the Black delegation, once again, takes a hit.
Do you think the Polynesian team was sandbagging on this one too? Because I looked at that and I was like, that is a perfect pick for the Polynesian team. I mean, that is right down the middle of the plate. Whereas I couldn't in my head really rationalize the other two. Do you think they were playing it a little bit? I mean, do you think they could have been like, Storm, Spider-Ham, and Howard the Duck?
I mean, I think there's a strong. I think it could work with the Scarlet Witch. I think there's probably some knowing how Tamati works the backstories really well and ties it in to things in various Polynesian cultures. There's probably an analog for the Scarlet Witch. Johnny Storm I can't really see, but it felt a little bit like a sandbag, even as far as him being Johnny Storm. It makes you think about right. The other Storm.
The fix is in.
The fix was in. But let's go through Tamati's backstory. So Maia Monroe belongs to the Maori tribe called the Urikehu. Their traditions trace their descent to Ira lightning and Watiri thunder. When her mutant ability manifested as control of the weather, this was seen as the fulfillment of a prophecy to lead her people. Maya is revered as a leader and protector of her people. She is a founding member of the X-Men. Currently, she is the co-leader of a new team that includes Namor. There's a strong relationship built on mutual respect. Maya is one of the few people that Namor trusts. Her codename is Storm. And reimagined, Storm will have a Moko Kaui, a traditional chin tattoo with designs that connect her to her people, ancestors, and gods. And he was even nice enough to include an image, which I'll link to you in the various show notes. So,
oh my God, I love everything about this. I mean, this is the polar opposite of the Dazzler pick.
It always comes back to that.
Poor Black delegation.
So she's an amazing pick. I was excited to see where she was gonna go. Even for us casuals, I mean, she's sort of a big deal. So yeah, I think she's a phenomenal pick for whoever ended up with her.
And let's see. Sorry, guys, I'm in a little bit out of sorts in our orders.
Mike, dead air kills radio and podcasting. Literally, the show is dead now.
Do you want me to put the draft recap on the screen? Like I've got it literally on my phone. That's what you're saying next.
You need to cut to commercial.
No.
Cut to commercial.
Do you edit any of this? Is there any editing involved?
No, we actually lean into technical difficulties on the show. we lean into them. So this is a little something for the audience.
So back in the day, all right. So I'm gonna vamp a little bit while you're trying to find your Excel spreadsheet or whatever. So back in the day, Mike and I had a radio show. We're both huge hip hop fans. We had a show called Electric Relaxation, named after A Tribe Called Quest song. It was the best. Now, it was a pretty low-end radio station, you know, back in the early 90s. And so there wasn't a lot of automation. And we were pulling forward a lot of music that was just, you know, the music that we were listening to, but wasn't, you know, necessarily stuff that had a lot of radio edits, let's say. You know, it wasn't really prepared and tuned, you know, to be played on the air. And so some of these songs would have curse words, you know, but of course you can't play live on the air, you know, songs with a bunch of curse words. However, in the spirit of no prep whatsoever, and just relying on utter hubris in our own memories and brains, what we did was we would do live edits on air. So whoever had memorized the lyrics of the song would have their fingers on a switch, and the switch would basically turn the transmission on and off. So as the music's playing and a curse word's coming up, you just see, you know, one of us was sitting there just like, all right, rapping along with the thing, you know, just lip syncing it or something, and then like flick, 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 like as the curse words were coming up. I now do alumni interviews and went back and interviewed some candidates from that high school who wanted to go to college. I'm, you know, doing alumni interviews on behalf of the college. And I happened to interview the radio station manager, like the current radio station manager. And she's telling me about, you know, the radio station. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Well, you know, I did a show on that, you know, for a long while. It was a lot of fun. And then I told her that story and she almost fell off her chair. I felt like Methuselah. I mean, I have never felt older in my life when she's like, yeah, we basically have an iTunes playlist, you know? and I'm sitting there talking about like, I'm live soldering wires on air in order to make this reach Kentucky, you know? But yeah, there was a lot of like, you know, sweating live on air, you know, making sure we had it and manually fiddling with switches to make that radio show happen. And I wouldn't have had it any other way.
I literally picture you guys with like hundreds of FCC letters in the garbage can and thousands of dollars in ignored fines from 20 years ago.
I got to say, but the hubris was fairly warranted, and we do have massive memories, at least for trivia, clearly, as you can see from this show. Because, you know, we had memorized those lyrics, and I think maybe in, you know, over the course of a year, you know, of that show, we let through like maybe 2 words, maybe 3.
No, there was one where we just basically had to talk over the track.
Oh, there was that one song. Oh, yes.
We just gave a disclaimer due to the overwhelming artistic quality of the song.
Well, like any NWA, like Ice-T, like it's just like, that's basically just like editorial content at that point, right? There's no way to press a button that many times.
We decided we have felt that the artistic value of the song outweighs the explicit content. Well, so the things that jammed me up is that our buddy, I don't know if you remember our buddy, the Quarantine Dream, he was breaking down draft picks from the first round, but he only broke down half of the first round picks. So he came back with breakdowns of the other first round picks and a couple of the second round picks. So I'll give it up to Quarantine Dream. He broke down the number 5 pick in the first round, which was Jean Grey. Amazing pick from the Jewish delegation. Grey mixes the wisdom of Solomon with the power of Samson. She's got a never say die attitude and otherworldly IQ. In addition to that, serving as the matriarch of a large and at times convoluted family, displays her leadership capabilities. 100. He also gave a breakdown for the flash pick by the Caucasian delegation. Fueled by the Speed Force and by the audacity of caucasity, Barry Allen is his inspired choice by the Caucasian delegation. Speed, he posted the best 40 time. Smarts, endurance, a wholesome image, constantly fighting with underlying feelings of entitlement and guilt. Perfect fit. Now, here's his breakdown of the domino pick from our friends in the Black delegation. Folks, we have our first major surprise of the draft. It's fitting that the Black delegation would stay woke and go from the perennially slept on domino. I love that the team is led by a woman, but will this open the door for the white delegation to make a play for Storm/Vixen? Foreshadowing.
Almost prescient.
He also broke down the Superman pick. You make some draft picks to fill a need. The Latinx team makes this draft pick to fill all needs. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than an ill-conceived border wall built on lies, brick by an insecure, myopic. Oh, sorry, folks. We've got to go to break.
Yeah, there were a whole lot of "sorry, Trump" kind of comments to the Superman pick.
And he also broke down Wolverine. Folks, think of how great J.J. Watt is. Now give him a set of knives and the ability to rapidly heal. That type of talent is now in the Latinx delegation. Logan is a prototypical slasher and an intense tactician. The only baggage he has are anger issues, concerns about his height.
Latinx getting a lot of love there for those picks.
And he also broke down the Black delegation's next pick. Not only are the Black delegation reclaiming their time, they're reclaiming their diva. As powerful on stage as she is in the scrap, Dazzler may turn out to be a pitch-perfect pick. Interesting move so far, taking two underrated yet undeniably talented choices in subsequent rounds.
I concur. Like I said, I actually sort of feel what the Black team is doing here. Hashtag support.
And Quarantine Dream's next breakdown was Blade. And he rage quit.
Exactly.
He posted a LeBron walks out of the press conference gif, and I think we lost Quarantine Dream, guys. So our next pick,
We'll come back.
Our next pick was the Native American delegation, and they selected Punisher. Flame emoji. Joaquin, their captain, had a backstory for him. His name is Franklin Quijega, an Apache, fresh out of the Marine Corps after 15 years. He comes home to his family. He cherished the fact that he can be with them, but they are killed due to a head-on collision on the reservation. The other party responsible were driving while intoxicated. They were brought before a tribal court, and they get off on a technicality. This sets Franklin off, and he seeks revenge. As he kills his way towards the source of his pain, he finds out that people who killed his family are a rich family, and the higher-ups in the tribal justice system were bought off, figuring out that that's why his people are living so poor. Now he goes on his own. Having training in advanced infantry and a recon marine, he starts a war, aided by the lower financial standing class of his own people. Hiding out in the boondocks, they supply him with money and weapons. His face, his legacy, is a warning to others of his rage and vengeance should anyone try to screw over their own for personal gain. The Punisher symbol on his face.
This character makes me feel some sort of way, Mike. I just feel like the crossover, to me, the Punisher's always been a character that's about losing indescribable loss, pain, and yet still finding a way to be committed to a type of sort of like social justice, essentially, or whatever, even if that tends to be sort of viciously dark social justice. So it feels like a pitch perfect pick to me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there are more layers to be explored with a Native American Frank Castle, or Frank Cahagan, as it were. What are your thoughts? What were your thoughts of the Punisher? Yes.
Yeah, I think Punisher, from a points perspective, if you're talking about appearances and leadership, the way that the ranking system works for the fantasy league, isn't going to be the biggest hitter. But I'll tell you, just from the heart of the issue here, does the character make sense? Does the backstory make sense? I think it's wonderful. I think this is one of those, they went with a story that was going to be great and just run him in the universe. Points be damned.
Yeah. I mean, and the Punisher's one of those weird characters. He has a solo book, and he had a recent solo book that was written by Matthew Rosenberg, where he got a hold of the War Machine armor, and he did work. He did some.
Mm-hmm.
So he, the way he's written, he's not he's a tough nut to crack. I mean, he racks up points. He fights through a lot of adversity. I think that even maintaining the scoring system, he might be a little bit more than some of the other picks that we talked about.
Well, honestly, Mike, the way I'm thinking about it, I'm starting to wonder if it might be possible that a team wins the draft based on points, but actually loses the draft based on substance. And that's actually going to be sort of intriguing to watch as these picks develop.
That is a great transition into the last pick of the second round, rather, which was the multi delegation. As you remember, they had the first pick and they drafted Captain America, and they didn't have a lot to say about the backstory for Captain America. Their nominations for this time out were The One Above All, Wonder Woman, and Captain Marvel. And the fans spoke, and overwhelmingly they spoke for Wonder Woman. So Wonder Woman is now multiracial. Unfortunately, Frankia, the captain of the multiracial team, didn't give us a lot to work with in terms of reimagining her backstory and how she would fit. So I feel like we should just brainstorm our own backstories in order to fill the time.
Well, educate me a little bit, guys. Wonder Woman's not already sort of a multiracial type character?
I mean, that's a perfect example of the white default. She's evolved from a god. She's from an island of Amazons who, in the 1930s were all imagined to be white. I think that, one of the things that the great things that the Wonder Woman movie did is that imagine the Amazons as a widely diverse ethnic breakdown of women, of powerful women. And it's fairly easy, if you're coming up with a more modern take on the Amazons and on Wonder Woman, to imagine that the Amazons aren't just default white.
It's actually super confusing because in my head, how could an Amazon be default white? So actually the comic book history here is actually sort of intellectually confusing for me.
Yeah, I mean, again, the 1930s and the fact that she's such a traditional avatar for white femininity, for lack of a better term. There's been such a hold on the character in the imaginations of white people that it's been hard to imagine her any other way.
Well, then in that sense, I think it makes perfect sense to reclaim this character for the draft. And that's actually a compelling reason for this pick, I think, given that history and context.
Yeah. I am curious about what, we'll have to get some more clarification as to the exact configuration of ethnicities. If it were up to me, I would make her probably racially ambiguous, such that it enables her to blend in to almost any society.
And her name could be Vin Diana.
I think that there's something to her, given that she's meant to be a symbol beyond, in the quote unquote man's world. She's meant to be a symbol for powerful femininity and an inspiration. It would help her in that mission to be able to be claimed by women all over the world as one of their own, as opposed to being clearly delineated as a member of one community rather than a member of another.
But that's not the case for this generation, right? With Gal Gadot, like they've sort of already bent the character in the movies.
I mean, it's kind of hard to say. I would say that she presents still as a white woman. I mean, she's Israeli, and that's its own kind of.
Tune in next week as we discuss this on the podcast. little teaser there.
When we have Annie on the podcast, we'll talk about the complicatedness of Jewish identity as vis-a-vis Caucasians. But I think that I think with Gal Gadot, I think she's maybe not as far enough of a step towards racial ambiguity to be inclusive beyond white femininity.
Okay, that's interesting, Mike. I actually thought of her as a person of color sort of in my head. So I actually think, yeah, maybe we should put a pin in that for a deeper conversation down the line.
Okay. It would help. It would probably help to have a woman in a Jewish woman to flesh that out. So yeah, Annie,
come to the podcast.
And talk a little bit, and maybe we'll have Frankie on to talk about her experiences as both because that's the other thing about Frankia. Frankia is not only multiracial, she's also Jewish. So maybe she can talk a little bit more about that too.
Next week's show already coming together, Mike.
Maybe so. You have any further thoughts about Wonder Woman?
No, not really. I mean, the character of Wonder Woman has, I've liked the character, but it's always felt kind of one-dimensional to me. It's sort of the traditional presentation of Wonder Woman. And so, while it's a very, powerful character and fraught in all of the ways that both of you have already discussed, I'm really looking forward to, having some further thoughts on, what does it mean, and why, and kind of complicate, what could be a much more interesting and powerful character than what it feels like the default writing has been. But at the same time, I'm not that deep on the DC universe. I can talk a lot more about, backstories in Marvel Comics and in like Vertigo, or something like that. But
you've read, or I'm sorry, I'm sure you've seen cartoons.
Oh yeah, I mean, back in the day, I watched the TV series, and had a complete crush. And I've seen the new Wonder Woman movie and so on. So, but even in that, it feels a bit one note, right? So, it feels like the new Wonder Woman movie, while it starts off as this sort of, white empowerment, white femininity, being empowered kind of story, it really takes a turn where, she kind of has to take a step back and play second fiddle, or at least the way that they constructed the story, kind of play in this box, where she's not able to be fully herself. And so much of the story is, then getting back to where she could be fully herself, which I thought was a bit unnecessary. I thought that the character fully in its power, and I don't just mean like superpowers, I mean like, its voice, its kind of personality and all that kind of stuff, was much more interesting. So I don't know, I feel like it's a character that has a lot of promise, but has not gotten the full treatment that it could get, to make it as awesome as it could be.
Right. I mean, one of the issues that I've always had with Wonder Woman as a character is that compared to her other companions in the quote unquote DC Trinity, her supporting cast isn't nearly as iconic. As that of Batman and Superman. Like we could run off a whole list of people affiliated with Batman and Superman that and be able to create in our minds stories where Batman is way in the periphery. Just because of how well known the extended universe of Superman and Batman characters are. And we really can't do that with Wonder Woman. There really aren't a lot of characters that have stood the test of time and have carved out, niches to of their own. So to that end, it's really easy to say, well, let's tell a Wonder Woman story that's set in the past because she's not really moored in the present in the way that these other characters are.
By the way, as a side note, anyone who hasn't watched the Harley Quinn Birds of Prey movie should really see it. I really enjoyed it. And honestly, I saw the Wonder Woman movie and I enjoyed it as I was watching it, but then it kind of left no impression on me afterwards. You know that feeling of like you're in the theater and you're with it for those scenes, but then 15 minutes later, there's no resonance to it?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. So did you see 1917?
No.
Okay. So 1917 was, again, set.
Not yet. It's on the list.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it in the theaters, and obviously that's hard to do nowadays.
Yeah, not a thing anymore, Mike. Tragically.
And it's really a triumph of cinematography. It's the Roger Deakins flex, the one shot for the whole movie. I think that there's a similarity in that movie. Without spoiling anything, I think it's a flex of filmmaking and of cinematography that is not doesn't necessarily leave a lasting impression, but about kind of creating that mood while you're watching the movie. And I think it's interesting that both Wonder Woman and 1917 are set during World War One, which was the war to end all wars is what it was. And it was very much about just how crazy it was to have a world war and to have all this suffering and all this bombing and all these trenches and all these this what was seen at the time to be the high point of warfare, the low point of humanity, and at that moment of man's cruelty to man and just how horrible it could be. I think that what the filmmaker was probably trying to go for with Wonder Woman was create that stark contrast to the world that Wonder Woman came from and the world that Wonder Woman was stepping into. And by making it, unfortunately, the woman in a very male world, trying to show what she was bringing to the table as a feminine figure. But again, I think it falls victim to that issue of, well, how is she relevant to today, though? It's a fun story for 100 years ago, but what does it mean for 2017 or 2020?
And they don't even but they don't even cash in on, that heart of it, which you are absolutely right, I think was an attempt in there, because at the end of the movie, they even do the feint to, hey, actually, this wasn't all constructed by a god. It was, humanity itself, that was causing this. And then it's like, nope, psych, actually, it wasn't God controlling everybody, and we just have like a big CGI battle with this one god, and we solved World War One. It's like, what the hell? Like, you completely undercut, that whole thing by...
Like, they were almost there. They were right there,
yes,
with the harsh critique. And then they realized, wait, but guys, we have to have a big CGI battle at the end. How do we big CGI?
I don't know, guys. I guess I feel, first off, I actually really enjoyed the movie. And I guess I also sort of feel like when Captain America is in 1940 or 1935, wherever he is, we don't launch that same critique about how is he relevant to today's movies or whatever. It feels like we're holding her to a higher bar than we have for other characters.
I would disagree. I think with Captain America, that's part of it's inherent to the character, that he's a person of a different era. And he's literally frozen in ice and wakes up in the present day, and he's confused about the world that he woke up into. If Wonder Woman ended with her getting frozen in ice and waking up in the present day, then I'd get it. But we're meant to believe that for the last 100 or so years, Wonder Woman's just been out there doing things.
Yeah, but that's not really fair, Mike. There's a story there that you haven't seen about what her experiences have been like over that time period. And that could be a very powerful, compelling story, equally as compelling as Captain America coming out of the ice, how she's dealt with the evolution of modern society. So I think just because we haven't seen the story, just like we hadn't had with the first Captain America, doesn't mean that resonant story doesn't exist for her.
Right, but what I'm saying is that it doesn't in the comics.
Like, oh, well, fair enough. Since I read the comics, you win. #destruction. Well played, Mike.
In the comics, she's just in whatever year she's in. So because she was created at the time, then she was in that era. There's not that sense that it's funny though, because actually DC has this initiative that they're working on, or may not work on, depending on what the rumors are saying, where they're attempting to recast Wonder Woman as the first superhero, and they're trying to create that timeline that we're talking about, where Wonder Woman emerges in the early 20th century, and she's essentially been that all this the whole superheroic age was ushered in by her, and create that relevance to the heroes and the ones that have the various generations of heroes that have existed since the early 20th century. But
well, I guess
I'm just saying,
I guess, Mike, all I'm saying is even with what we're doing here, essentially, right, and what a lot of the modern Marvel movies are doing, is essentially fixing a lot of mistakes from the prior comic book era and prior generations, essentially. So I get what you're saying, that story might not be there for her in the comics, but that doesn't necessarily mean that because the movie was set in the past, that you're not going to get that resonance in future Wonder Woman movies.
I agree. I hope. I mean, I'm crossing my fingers and hoping that it happens. But I do think that anytime you do a period movie where it's not cashed out in the present, you run the risk of people not seeing, not seeing the relevance to the present. I think Captain America, because what he brings as part of the character is he is of a different era, and he's constantly being positioned and juxtaposed against the present day.
Well, I'm sorry, Mike, but how is a movie about hatred of war and inhumanity to man not relevant to the present? I just don't see how that's a valid critique of Wonder Woman, the original. Like, I don't understand that. Like, clearly, it's relevant to modern society.
Yes, I agree. I mean, forgive me if it sounded like I didn't like the movie.
Fair enough.
Like I like the movie. It was more of a critique of how that character's been fleshed out in comparison to the other characters at her A tier, because she is meant to be an A tier character. But we really should move on to sort of previewing the second round. I mean, sorry, the third round. As it stands, one of the things that we're doing with these previews is we're allowing the guests to nominate possible draft picks for that round. S, you're the only captain here, so you have the privilege, and you're well positioned since you drafted first in round 2, but you drafted last in round 3. You have the opportunity to lock in some characters and protect them from being drafted for the totality of the round. So
unleash your power.
That's right. And I really, really appreciate, this is why I wanted to be on this episode in particular, because, for those who are not familiar with a snake draft, you've got your draft order. We've got 8 teams drafting, and a snake draft says that in the first round, it's order 1 through 8, but then the next round, it's 8 through 1, and back and forth and back and forth. So my Superman and Wolverine picks were the number 8 of round 1 and the number 1 of round 2. But now in round 3, I've got this huge gap, in picks, where there is still a lot of amazing talent out there. And there are some that I think, would fit my team so perfectly well. So I want to be able to get in here, and, honestly, any of these 3 would be wonderful for Team Latinx, but I think there's one in particular that would really make me happy to be able to lock in. So I am definitely going to do some lobbying on this one. I am sorry. You tell me when you want me to actually launch into them.
Right now, no time like the present.
Okay, great. So for my, I've got 3 picks. I'm going to tell you the backstory for one of them first, and then the other 2 are kind of a pair. And I could go, with either one of them. But for the first one, I want to tell you, just for a bit of context, the story of El Dorado. El Dorado, the magical city of gold. El Dorado, actually, the term, it's a bit confusing because it started off as in reference to a particular man. el hombre dorado o el rey dorado, the golden king or the golden man. And then, you know, that was a term used by the Spanish Empire to describe a mythical tribal chief of the Muisca people, an indigenous people of Colombia, who, as an initiation rite, covered himself with gold dust and submerged in Lake Guatavita. Now, the legends surrounding El Dorado changed over time as it went from being a man to a city to a kingdom, and then finally an empire. Well, the Spanish, and I fully claim this, the Spanish love to loot and pillage. They love to go into indigenous populations and, you know, take what they could and then obviously, you know, make the remainder a part of their empire. Well, the Spanish searched for El Dorado for a long time. There were many different expeditions, many stories told about El Dorado, but El Dorado continued to be hidden, you know? So there was this hidden city full of a really valuable natural resource with a king who was known to be a like special exalted king who had powers and costume that came from that natural resource in that city, and who people kept trying to find, but never could. Anybody, can you guess who my number one pick is?
Survey says Black Panther.
That's right, Black Panther. So the Black Panther becomes the Gold Panther. And Black Panther, I mean, is absolutely my favorite MCU movie. It's my kid's favorite MCU movie. Actually, I think one of my daughters prefers Thor Ragnarok, you know, as does my wife. But I think that's the combination of the humor and the amazing amount of eye candy in that movie. But Black Panther, you know, I think is absolutely amazing. And boy, I mean, you take gold and swap it for vibranium. You know, you take El Dorado and swap it for Wakanda. I mean, it is the same story. You could absolutely imagine, you know, the indigenous people of Latin America, had they not suffered the effects of colonialism, you know, over hundreds and hundreds of years, you know, what could have been and what would have been, which is, you know, very much like the heart and soul of the story of the Black Panther. So number one pick for me is absolutely Black Panther. So
just to flesh this out and even further, so your imagined El Dorado or Wakanda, you know, whatever you're choosing to call it, it's still going to have all the trappings that, you know, the highly technological advancements, the science, the genius, the whole shebang.
Hell yeah, man. Hell yeah. And I think the gold was just a ruse. I think they had vibranium all along, you know? I think it's kind of like
vibranium.
It's kind of like you hear all these myths about, you know, if like aliens or gods actually came down, you know, how would the people tell the story about them? Well, they didn't have the words, right? They wouldn't even have the words for what that thing was. And since it was all kind of a telephone game that spread out, yeah, I think in the end, who knows? Maybe vibranium actually has a golden color to it.
Okay. I feel that.
I love the idea. I mean, you know, so many of these civilizations were actually incredibly advanced mathematically, you know, engineering, architecture, all of those things, the way they did civic planning. I mean, like, there was a point in history where the largest, most populous cities were in Latin America, not in Europe.
Yeah, that's true.
And, you know, and again, you just imagine, you know, what could have, should have been, you know, had timelines, you know, been a bit different. And very easily they could have like flying golden spaceships.
So tell us more about Latinx T'Challa. You know, does he still have the same personality?
That's a good question. You know, okay, I hadn't got that deep into the character, but let's see. You know, I at that point, I think honestly with this one, I think it fits so well already. And maybe this is just my own bias for, you know, the love of Black Panther and like, and all of that. But yeah, I think he fits so well already. Like I could absolutely, see that same character who's, and I'm a huge fan of like the Ta-Nehisi Coates, version of Black Panther, and I just gobbled those up, that live sort of, heavy as the head that wears the crown, kind of spirit that permeates all through it, the complexity of the politics and all of that, absolutely, is still real. I mean, if you know anything about like the backstory of like Simon Bolivar and socialism and everything, throughout Latin America, and the many attempts to sort of create, kind of a coalition, an overarching empire, and then the way that comes to battle with other empires and so on. How do you hold together coalitions of people that, originally were tribes to begin with, when you're trying to create nation states, and how like the intersection of that ethnic heritage, those nations, then intersects with political ideology. I mean, I think all of those themes are absolutely there. And, and I think, a character like Black Panther who's super noble, but honestly, maybe errs on the side of being too idealistic, who really cares about, family and history and so on and so forth. But maybe, resists modernity a bit, cultural modernity, as, while he accepts sort of technological modernity. I mean, I think, the everything sort of fits so damn well. You could easily see just taking the same books, translating them into Spanish, and you'd have to change basically nothing.
So here's where I would have to step in as the commissioner. So technically speaking, you would only be drafting Black Panther. Theoretically.
So is the Black team gonna come and be like, "Oh, people Okoye."
I mean, theoretically, while the backstory can be what the backstory is, it is still possible for someone else to draft other Wakandans, and the concept of Wakanda.
What? No, I am drafting the concept of Wakanda. I am drafting Wakanda. What are you talking about?
You can't draft a place.
There's no point. There's no point to Black Panther if like.
What I'm saying is that you get Wakanda, you get the concept of Wakanda with your Black Panther draft, but that doesn't mean that you can keep other people from drafting other characters who also have Wakanda as their.
So there's like a Wakanda franchise around the world. There's like a Wakanda in India where they don't serve beef. And there's like
no, you get Wakanda, you just don't get to colonize it. You just get to visit it like a tourist.
No, I mean essentially, yeah, essentially everybody has the potential to have their Wakanda. If the Asian delegation drafts Shuri, and she wants she gets to have a Wakanda.
Shangri-La, I'm for it. Fine.
That I'm just letting you know. I'm just letting the people know, the drafting public know, that just because you've drafted, that now granted, if Okoye, the Dora Milaje, Shuri, if those characters go undrafted, then they get to come along as part of the Wakanda package. But
well, I just say Black Panther's going to rack up a whole lot more points than Okoye is. So
fair enough. I just wanted to clarify because I know that there's going to be a lot of people. No, yes, you do not. You have not drafted Wakanda Forever, though. You know. You have to come up with your own.
Well, I'm sure the multiracial delegation will be glad to draft Shuri and then not explain it at all.
Oh.
Shots fired across the bow.
Yo, I was kind of mad about that Captain America pick. That's why. I mean, Captain America is Captain Puerto Rico. It's the Puerto Rican flag on his costume. You can't just draft Captain America, make him multiracial, and then not explain it.
That's a good point. That is, Frankia she's gonna have to answer for this when she's next on the show. So who are your other nominees?
All right, so my other two. And so one of the reasons I gave you all of this preamble about, you know, my own family history, you know, my mom being a Spanish teacher and blah, 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 is that, you know, I'm going more into stories, you know, and creators of stories. So my other two, the Spanish diaspora is well known for playing with and inventing artistic genres that bend reality in one way or the other. So for example, surrealism, you know, the artistic movement, is basically a Spanish invention. Magical realism, the literary movement, is basically an invention of Spanish literature. And both of those have been, you know, incredibly influential. So, you know, in my own life, you know, I did study Salvador Dali a bit. You know, I actually took a seminar-long course in college, like an entire semester-long course on one book, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, which is one of those, you know, kind of like the most fundamental books of magical realism. It won the Nobel Prize, so on and so forth. And essentially, you know, my next two picks are Doctor Strange as Salvador Dali. Now imagine, you know, as a painter, you need to be really perfect with your hands, be really focused, you know, have this vision, you know, that others can't see. And, you know, you can imagine with that imagination of Salvador Dali, where he's, you know, creating new worlds. In fact, he has a painting where Christ is hanging on the cross, but it is a four-dimensional cross. It's actually a projection of a hypercube in the painting. So he's literally projecting Christ onto other dimensions in the painting. Really wild stuff, right? Like really wild stuff for the time, just for painting. Well, you can imagine Doctor Strange similarly. So Salvador Dali, super weird, egotistical, kind of singular genius, you know, had a wife who really kept him in line, would lock him in a room to force him to work and everything, just to keep him like focused. But when he was in the work, he was, you know, he was in the work, but highly problematic in a bunch of other ways. Doctor Strange, same thing, you know, really successful doctor, surgeon, needs, you know, precise control of his hands as well as his brain to do his job. And you can imagine, you know, Doctor Strange, you know, being kind of steeped in these ideas of surrealism that were his own, you know, imagination, and then going through the accident, you know, and now I haven't worked out this bit, but, you know, essentially being able to tap into that, you know, world that he's constructing and realizing that it was you know, when he focused more inward than outward, you know, it actually gave them access to those other dimensions, that it was sort of a feint or a foreshadowing, you know, of his future abilities. So Doctor Strange as sort of a surrealist character, you know, coming out of Spanish painting. And then the second, Scarlet Witch. So Scarlet Witch as a Gabriel Garcia Lorca magical realism character, frankly, not as the author, but there is actually a character in 100 Years of Solitude, which is amazing. Like in a way, it's sort of that manic pixie dream girl, you know, for one of the characters in the book, which is really weird to say for like a Nobel Prize winning, you know, anti-colonial, you know, kind of story. But I think Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, you know, is somebody who kind of enters the world, you know, but discovers her ability to basically take reality and bend it, bring fantasy to it, you know, and use that ability to see reality in different ways in order to influence others, you know, and not only, you know, for her own gain, but also to give others a different perspective on their own reality. I think would be super fun and super powerful. So surrealism and magical realism, the movements as represented by Doctor Strange and Scarlet Witch. And, you know, obviously, because I want to win on points too. Black Panther, gets tons of appearances. And Doctor Strange as having his own books and then also showing up at Avengers and so on. Not as much, but boy, Scarlet Witch, it is like the new golden age of mutants. And I've got to imagine that there's going to be, a whole lot of Scarlet Witch, especially with WandaVision coming out on TV, which I'm really hyped for. That Vision, miniseries, was really awesome. So I'm hoping that both these characters, we'll see even more work in the comics, coming up.
And again, this is me stepping in under commissioner thing, assuming that if Quicksilver doesn't get drafted by anyone else, as her brother, you might get Quicksilver as part of a package deal for
can I not? I mean, can I just not? I mean, dear Black delegation, you can draft Quicksilver. I'm not going to be mad.
They'll do it.
Oh man,
we'll kill him off in one issue too.
Oh man. Now you're definitely put him in the Black delegation. Oh.
But no, in all seriousness, I totally, obviously with Scarlet Witch, there's a whole universe of people, around her, but that's like the entire, there's her family, but then there's the entire X universe. I wouldn't imagine I'd get Vision alongside with her either, or anything like that. But Doctor Strange, I guess you're also saying, I wouldn't automatically get Wong.
No, yeah. Wong is already of a different ethnicity. Wong gets to stay Wong until he's but he has to protect the realm, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I like
those are my picks. So question for you. Yeah, go ahead. Give me any feedback or anything.
No, I was gonna say I like all. Obviously, as a Black person, I'm feeling a little nervous. Nervous about potentially losing Wakanda. Oh yeah, actually, we might as well ask: would your Latinx T'Challa still want a romance with Polynesian Storm, newly Polynesian Storm?
Without going too much into my own personal history, yes. Absolutely. I'm going to leave it at that, though, because I feel like any comment I could possibly make now will just get me into trouble.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, there you have it, Internet. Run, don't walk to your computer screen to vote.
Yeah, by the time this podcast is out, the polls will be up and running. They'll either be on Twitter or they'll be on in the show notes. They'll be on a blog site, the racial draft blog page. You'll be able to vote there. You'll be able to vote on our Facebook page as well, which will link to the blog page. And the polls close on Saturday night when the round closes. So everyone will have as much opportunity to either vote for or against.
Protect Wakanda. Defensive voting this week on the racial draft.
La Pantera Dorada, que viva!
So I look forward to seeing how the vote take out. So this is your opportunity, since you've now protected 3 characters, you now get to trash talk the upcoming picks in the round and maybe project out who you see going where.
So yeah, it's super hard to project, by the way. Like I gotta say, the mix of people that we have got as part of this project, I think, is absolutely one of the strengths here, and I hope everybody appreciates that, and that all of the captains do show up on the podcast as well, to talk and share their perspectives, because I think from folks who are more kind of playing with the humor, or playing with the competition, to folks who are using this as an opportunity for essentially telling stories that are untold, or reimagining stories that have genre and myth but could be explored in new ways. I think the diversity, and not just from ethnic diversity, but the diversity of like the approaches and the personalities of everybody involved in this have just been super, super interesting. And so to me, so much of the fun is seeing, for example, the whole Spider-Man backstory to me was super fascinating. Like stuff I would have never known or never would have thought of, from a Native American perspective, and how that, it was beautiful. So many of these where people kind of elaborate and pull together, and kind of you learn something along the way. The real prize was the lessons we learned along the way.
I say that every episode.
So for that reason, again, we've played fantasy football forever, and with fantasy football, you have zero allegiance whatsoever. I mean, I'm from the Boston area, Patriots through and through, and would find myself literally rooting against Tom Brady, when he wasn't, on my fantasy team. But with this, because people are sort of, mixing it up a whole bunch, and there's so much you can do with it, and they aren't just being like straight run the numbers, what's the next mathematical, obvious pick. I think it makes it a lot less harder to predict, but for that reason, I think a lot more compelling, to watch and wait, from pick to pick, and a lot more satisfying, when we do get those backstories and we do get those justifications and we can talk about it.
Yeah. What about you, Marky? Do you have any predictions / projections for the upcoming round?
No, my prediction is just that it's just going to get more and more sophisticated, I think. I think captains are really sort of creating sort of a rhythm and a vision now for their picks and what they want to do with them. That as we sort of begin things in week one, might not have been there at like quite the same level, but as you see what other people do, it's sort of like help you reimagine how far you can go with your pick. So I think what really excites me is seeing these things grow and the level of sophistication increase as we move from week to week.
Yeah. I mean, obviously in the last round, we had the incendiary pick of Blade, and depending on how things go with the vote, we could have an additionally incendiary pick in T'Challa. I think that we won't see in the upcoming round too many major bombs being dropped in this round. I think people will try to make some safer picks in this round. I'm sure everyone has a scouting board and they have characters that they're looking to shore up for perhaps for point purposes or just for solid players on their teams. So I think we may see not choke per se, but because the stories, like you said, they're going to be interesting regardless. But I think that I don't think, with the possible exception of the Black delegation, I don't think we'll see any shockers. I think
I do have one firm prediction, however, now that you mention it. The Black delegation will draft Jubilee.
I would bet you 10 gets to 20 on that.
Someone that we're not expecting, Squirrel Girl.
Squirrel Girl! Yo, Squirrel Girl is great. I would have much respect for the Black delegation if they pick Squirrel Girl.
She's got the cakes. She's
love it. Yes.
She's a Black woman, if we're being real, so and listen, surprisingly, I mean, I know she doesn't have her solo book anymore, but she surprisingly has racked up some big wins over some heavy hitters.
Oh yeah.
So I wouldn't be mad at it. I don't know if you remember. I don't know if you heard the episode where Marky admitted that he's never heard of Iceman.
Also, now I have to admit I've never heard of Squirrel Girl. I have heard of Squirrel Girl, Mike.
I wasn't gonna say you had. I was just gonna bring up the fact that you still haven't heard of Iceman.
No, I definitely never heard of Iceman. That's weird.
Wait, you're Iceman?
There's some character called Iceman they were talking about last week. He was in an X-Men movie or something. It didn't register with me. I was like, who?
Like one of the original X-Men Iceman?
Yeah, that
guy.
guy.
You could just hear his name and guess what Iceman is.
No, I get what he is. I get that he's a dude that uses ice. I totally get the concept. Just didn't remember the dude.
Yo, Iceman and the Human Torch. They're complete ciphers to me. I just don't get them.
But yeah, Squirrel Girl, totally on top of that.
That's good. She's people like her, and she was supposed to get a TV show, so I think Marvel likes to use her. She has a pretty strong fan base.
I got to tell you, I am looking forward to us getting beyond the next few rounds, or maybe having an adjunct version of this draft, which goes into non-DC or Marvel, because personally, I'm a huge fan of a lot of the Vertigo comics, the Image comics. I think there's not enough, maybe familiarity or appearances with a lot of that stuff. But boy, being able to start, drafting Sandman or Doom Patrol or Saga, or there are so many other, kind of amazing stories out there. I mean, even Spawn, or the Max or something like that would be super, super interesting stories. I think they would be a bit esoteric, for the format of this show. But I'm telling you, a lot of my love of comics has been steeped in, those comics that, may never get a movie or a TV show. Although I got to say, the Doom Patrol TV show, the one on DC Universe, pitch perfect. Absolutely pitch perfect.
But I've heard great things.
Fantastic. And I tell you, if this, racial draft were in the position to kind of go beyond the, Marvel and DC, universe and go into sort of the now for the most nerdly nerds of all nerdingdom, going into like the Vertigo and the Image and the indie comics would give us so much fertile ground for a lot of really interesting stuff. For example, Crazy Jane in Doom Patrol is played by a Latina, in the Doom Patrol show. She was also in Orange is the New Black, and she's absolutely fantastic. I think it's like a great example how, I think when you get past sort of the mainstream Marvel and DC, you actually have a lot more kind of complicated and diverse, characters that would be great fodder for this show. So, maybe we just have one special episode, which is like, you can't draft anybody, who's in mainline Marvel, DC. Oh, Valiant. We'll give Valiant, because what the hell?
Well, yeah, I've actually given some thought to having those single episodes where, after we've finished up our first draft, having one-off episodes where it's almost like speed round, where we'll have a bunch of people on and we'll just draft as many characters as we can draft for our respective delegations. So that's definitely one that I'll kind of keep in my back pocket.
I can already tell you that Mike's goal is 5 to 7 shows a week. So it's just a matter of time before he incorporates that. Daily podcast, live stream.
I wish. But I guess that's winding us down to wrapping up for this week's episode. If you're joining us on the various podcasting platforms, whether it's Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, all the biggies, hit us up with a review, 5 stars, and we'll read it on the air. Also, hit us up on the various social medias, on Facebook, on Twitter. Give us a rah, vote in our polls. Say what you like, say what you don't like. and give us some feedback, and we'll try to do as much as we can to make it a show worth listening to and a show worth growing. We grow because of the community, and we hope that you want to be part of the community. Marky, do you have any closing words?
Yeah, I guess all I'd want to say is thanks for everyone who's a part of our new, hopefully pretty sane community, where we can discuss topics that, might otherwise be seen as sort of a bit tough to discuss in this type of context. And it's nice to see that there's a large body of people out there willing to have sort of sophisticated adult conversation around these sorts of issues. So great stuff, and let's keep growing that positive community.
Well, let's not forget to also have jokes about fistfuls of switchblades as well. Everyone's
I agree. I mean, I'm trying at some point in the rounds, I'm gonna have some of my comedy friends on, and then it's gonna be a lot of free for all stuff. So,
well, thank you very much, you guys. Thank you for having me on the podcast with you today. This was a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
And you'll be back another time to talk more trash.
Yeah, in about 2 rounds, hopefully, when the last pick in the draft again.
I mean,
well played, sir. Well played.
But yeah. And on that note, I guess I'll say our goodbyes. Still working on a sign off, but until next time, all things are possible.